have been waiting for this item for a very long time. This is a 3D printer. And before you switch off the video and say, "Bo, this has nothing to do with bags, traveling or etc," let me stop you right there. Because this 3D printer will be used to create some amazing EDC items like scales for Swiss Army knives, for instance. That being said, I have no clue about 3D printing and I will start completely from scratch. So join me in this journey of me learning 3D printing and using this Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro 3D printer for the very first time. Again, I'm new to this and I have been waiting for my very first 3D printer for a while. So if you have any tips and feedbacks, please comment below. This is the Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro, and while I start unpacking this, let me explain why I wanted to start 3D printing. On my Patreon I have the tier YKT Originals. In that group of amazing supporters I create achievements like a challenge coin, morale patches or a coffee mug, for instance. And every 6 months there is a new item. I always wanted to create a custom EDC pouch, but after talking to multiple designers this project never became a reality. I'm a huge fan of Swiss Army knives and I know that you can customize them by exchanging the scales. My brother is an incredible professional 3D artist, so with his help I will create a custom scale for a Victorinox Bantam that all of the YKT Originals will receive. By the way, if you want to support my channel and get access to those items, check out my Patreon at You Know The Bo. That custom scale will be printed professionally, or if this printer turns out to be great, will be printed and finalized by hand by me. But let's not get too much ahead of myself. I will definitely do a prototype myself with this printer to learn and see how this performs. I am a fairly tech-savvy person, so building and setting up this Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro was fairly straightforward for me. That being said, the manual does look very clear if you are not that tech-savvy in my humble opinion. By the way, if you consider getting into 3D printing yourself and you want to get this one, there will be an affiliate link in the description below. With that you won't pay more, but you will support the channel with a small kickback of that sale. Once the printer is built, you will need a place to place the printer. I got this small storage area on top of my shelf, which is very sturdy built, and the vibration detection and overall calibration works very automatically and straightforward. However, after 2 prints I realized that this printer vibrates a lot. So A, it is very noisy and the storage area acts somewhat as a resonance body so that it sounds like a big washing machine in my whole house. And B, the printer actually moved on the smooth surface. The first issue is obviously my personal situation and I will move it to a different place in the future. The second issue I solved by getting an anti-vibration dampening mat for washing machines. Now it doesn't move by itself and the sound is a little bit dampened. After the calibration process, the printer wants to do one first test print, which is a bottle opener. As you can see, the print wasn't that great, but I assumed that this can be improved by adjusting the settings. So my first question was, what to print first and where do I get the files? I was first looking for issues on my desk, and therefore I was looking for a way to organize my Samsung T5 SSDs, in addition to my test scale for my Swiss Army knife. I googled Swiss Army knife 3D print and came across Thingiverse.com, a page with a bunch of so-called STL files. So I downloaded 2 files. And the first step in the whole 3D printing process is to prepare those 3D files for the printer. You will need to use a so-called slicer program. As far as I understand, any 3D printer doesn't know how to print a regular 3D model. So this slicer software looks at a 3D model and, as the name implies, slices the model into many sheets that are stacked on top of each other. Moreover, it looks at hollow areas or overhangs and creates support structures that are also printed. I have to admit, I am totally confused by all of the settings inside the slicer program. But most of them you can leave as is and you will still get very good and usable prints. And I want to underline usable, because for them to be pretty or efficient I had to get into some of the settings. More on that later. After the program slices the 3D models, you get another file that you can copy to the printer. You can either use the cloud or an USB drive. I prefer the USB method. Then it is basically straightforward. Copy, print and wait. Depending on the size and the setting, it can take up to multiple hours to print. My first prints were all usable but not necessarily pretty. You see, one setting inside the slicer is the so-called brim. Brim. This creates the small support structure on the very first layer so that the print doesn't accidentally lose grip and slides around whilst printing. This brim needs to be cut off after the print. For smaller surface areas, this is a good security measure, but most of my prints have enough surface area on the very first layer. Therefore, I turned off this feature. Next is the infill in the support structure. Imagine a cube. Without support inside the cube, the structural integrity of the cube could be compromised. So you need to create support inside the cube, and here you can choose a few different styles. After watching some tutorials, I went with support cubic. The percentage of the infill will not only determine the amount of infill in those areas and the structural integrity, but also the material and the time needed. Another setting I am playing around with is the seams. I got these little points on my prints, and as far as I understand, these are the seams of a print. Supposedly you can't avoid them, but you can make them prettier by aligning them to a corner or an edge, for instance. And therefore, as far as I understand, you should use seams aligned in the settings. But I am still playing around with this setting. Up to now, I have printed helpful tools for my kitchen drawer, my desk, but also first tries of Swiss Army knives scales. The Anycubic Kobra 2 Pro is actually very easy to understand and operate. Plus the prints are good and great so far. Yes, they aren't flawless in terms of looks, so you might need to sand down some areas or refine them with a knife, for instance. However, do not forget I am very new to this, and I assume that I can optimize my settings and the sliced files to improve my 3D prints. So long story short, I printed the scales for my Swiss Army knife Bantam, and as you can tell, it doesn't look nice when it comes down to those finer details. But honestly, after some more research and watching reviews and tutorials, this is more or less to be expected with this kind of printer. My scales have a lot of fine details, so I will print them professionally somewhere else. But this printer is great for all of the useful items in my home that don't need to look fancy with special detailing, for instance my kitchen cupboard organizers. And for pre-visualization of prototypes, this is great as well. Can I recommend this 3D printer? Yes. For me as a beginner, it was easy to set up and operate. The more difficult part is to design, modify and slice the files. But that is all in the software in 3D design. So in essence, this has nothing to do with the printer itself. There is still so much to learn for me, but the printer was very helpful so far. I will definitely keep you up to date and what other items I will print in the future, so don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any more questions, and more importantly, if you have any tips and tutorials or recommendations what I can do with the 3D printer, please comment below. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button, and please feel free to subscribe to my channel and click that little bell icon so you won't miss next videos. Also, check out my Instagram, second channel and podcast at You Know The Boat. Stay safe and healthy everyone, and I see you in the next videos. Thank you very much.